Hi, I'm Mara. My dad drove me to an orphanage when I was 7. No goodbye, no bags, just silence and a lie that it was better this way. He started a new life with a new wife, gave her everything he once promised me. And now? Now she wants the one thing I have left, my inheritance. But what cuts deeper than betrayal is how quiet it all was, how carefully they removed me, like erasing pencil from paper. They held a funeral I wasn't invited to. They read a prayer list without my name. They used my childhood doll in their daughter's arms. And when I finally stood up to say, I was here too, they told me to stay quiet. So tell me, what would you do if your own family acted like you were never born? I still remember the sound of rain tapping against the windshield, soft but steady, like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. I was 7. My knees barely reached the edge of the seat, and my shoes swung silently above the rubber mat on the passenger side. The car smelled like Dad's old work jacket, faint sweat, cheap cologne, and engine oil. But that night, it felt unfamiliar, cold, off. He didn't say much during the drive. I kept glancing up at him, trying to read his face, but his eyes stayed locked on the road, jaw clenched. The streetlights outside flickered through the fogged-up windows, cutting across his cheekbones like slow lightning. Finally, I whispered, "Where are we going?" His knuckles tightened around the wheel, and after a long pause, he muttered, "It's better this way." That was all. There was no overnight bag on the back seat, no toy, no blanket, no lunchbox. Just me, my worn-out stuffed rabbit, and the echo of that sentence. It's better this way. I remember thinking maybe we were going somewhere fun, like a surprise trip. Maybe he just forgot my things and we'd come back for them. Kids try so hard to believe. The car pulled up in front of a tall, gray building. The sign said Tacoma Children's Center, but I didn't know what that meant. It looked like a school or a hospital, but something about it felt final. He didn't turn off the engine, just left it humming. He opened the door, walked around, and opened mine. I hesitated. He didn't kneel, didn't offer a hand, just said, "Let's go." The receptionist smiled with too many teeth. "Welcome, sweetie. Let's get you settled." Her voice was high and fake, like a cartoon. I remember blinking up at her, my fingers tightening around my rabbit's neck. Behind me, the door shut. I turned around. He was already walking back to the car. Didn't wave, didn't look back, didn't say goodbye. He just left. That night, I lay on a cot with sheets that smelled like bleach and metal. The room was filled with quiet crying and rustling from other kids. I kept staring at the ceiling tiles, waiting for the door to creak open, for someone to say there had been a mistake, that he was coming back. But no one came. 3 weeks later, Christmas rolled around. The orphanage staff decorated the common room with faded paper snowflakes and a plastic tree. They played music from an old boombox that kept skipping during Silent Night. We sat in a circle while volunteers handed out presents, generic ones, each with a name tag. Mine said Maria Shepherd. That wasn't even close. Inside the box was a remote control monster truck, a toy for a boy. I stared at it, blinking hard, as the other kids tore into their wrapping paper. A staffer leaned down and said, "Maybe your dad sent it, honey. We'll check the records later." She smiled, but her eyes said she didn't believe it either. I nodded, pretended it was okay. That night, after lights out, I slid the box into the trash can beside the hallway bathroom. I didn't cry. Crying was loud, and loud got noticed. Weeks turned into months. I stopped asking questions. But one night, while waiting for the hallway lights to flicker off, I overheard 2 staff talking near the kitchen. "She's not on the reunification list," one said. "Father said she wasn't a good fit for the new situation." "New wife, right?" the other replied. "They just had a baby." I didn't move, didn't breathe. My stuffed rabbit, now missing one ear, was pressed against my chest. I whispered into its frayed fur. I must have done something wrong. Time doesn't heal. Time just piles more distance between the truth and what you're willing to believe. Now, 25 years later, I sat in my one-bedroom apartment, sipping chamomile tea from a chipped mug. The walls were bare, save for a single framed photo of Mount Rainier my coworker gave me after a weekend hike. The city lights of Tacoma blinked through the blinds behind me. I hadn't thought about him in years. Not really. He was just a name I used to flinch at. A file in my mental cabinet labeled "Do Not Open." Until yesterday. Until that email. It slid into my inbox like a quiet bullet. No warning, no subject line flare. Just 5 words. Estate notification, Robert Godfrey, deceased. I didn't open it right away. But when I did, everything started again. Subject, estate notification, Robert Godfrey, deceased. Those words sat in the center of my screen like a landmine. My finger hovered over the mouse, not because I was scared of what I'd find, but because I knew whatever came next wouldn't undo anything. It wouldn't return that night in 1999. It wouldn't rewrite the silence that followed. Still, I clicked. The email was sterile. "Dear Ms. Shipman," it began, like we were strangers on a formal business call. "You are being contacted as next of kin by birth in relation to the estate of Robert Godfrey. Next of kin by birth. Not daughter, not family, just biology." It went on to explain that I may have a legal right to claim a portion of his estate, should I choose not to waive my interest. That phrase was bolded, as if they expected me to sign away whatever tiny fragment of dignity might still be attached to that name. I stared at the screen, hand resting against my jaw. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't move. I just kept reading that one line over and over. He couldn't call me his daughter, but I was good enough for the paperwork. I got up, stretched my legs, and walked toward the kitchen for more tea, mostly to avoid thinking. The kettle squealed, loud in the quiet apartment, but it didn't drown out the memory echoing inside me. Curiosity is a cruel thing. I opened a browser tab and typed his name, Robert Godfrey, into the search bar. A few articles popped up, his real estate holdings, a couple of photos at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and then, there it was, a public Facebook post, shared by Vera. The picture stopped me cold. It was a cheerful family photo, Robert in a navy suit, Vera beside him in something pearl-colored, her hair perfect and tight like a news anchor's. And between them were 2 kids, maybe 10 and 12. One of them, the girl, was holding a porcelain doll. My porcelain doll. I leaned forward, heart hammering harder than it had any right to. That doll was a one-of-a-kind gift from my grandfather. A delicate white dress, hand-painted eyes, and a tiny chip on her left cheek from when I'd dropped her on my birthday. I had cried that day, not because she broke, but because I had. There was no mistaking it. That doll was mine. Not only did he build a new life, he gave away pieces of mine. I sat back, stunned by the intimacy of the betrayal. This wasn't just about inheritance or forgotten birthdays. This was theft of something deeper, a theft of proof that I ever mattered. I opened the image in a new tab, zoomed in until the pixels blurred, until the doll's cracked cheek was all I could see. It was mine, I whispered, down to the chip. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed, laptop glowing dimly on the nightstand. I stared at the open email, finger hovering again, this time over the delete button, but I didn't delete it. Instead, I created a new folder and named it Ghosts. I dragged the email inside. You can run from pain. You can cover it in sarcasm, wrap it in a full-time job, pretend it's something you've outgrown. But when it sends you a legally formatted message at 8:13 a.m., you might want to sit up and read. I caught my reflection in the dark window. Older, sharper, but still carrying pieces of that girl who'd clutched a rabbit while her father drove away in silence. I need to know what he left, I said aloud. And why? So I called the number at the bottom of the email. It rang twice before a woman with a cheerful voice answered. Godfrey and Mason, how may I direct your call? I cleared my throat. I received an email regarding Robert Godfrey's estate. I need to speak with the estate manager. There was a pause, small but heavy. May I ask, are you the biological child of Mr. Godfrey? She tried to sound neutral, but that slight hesitation around child landed like a slap. I could hear the mental sorting behind her voice, placing me into a file somewhere between irrelevant and problematic. My back straightened instinctively. Yes, I said firmly, by birth. She transferred me. A few clicks, some on-hold music, then a male voice came through, formal and distant. This is Gregory Mason. I'm handling the Godfrey estate. What's your inquiry? I explained who I was, expecting confusion or surprise. But he wasn't caught off guard at all. Our records indicate that Mr. Godfrey signed a full relinquishment of parental rights in 1999. That terminated all legal obligations. I blinked. What? It's in the file, he replied flatly, as if I were disputing a phone bill. Would you like me to forward the scanned copy? I whispered yes, and within minutes it hit my inbox. I opened the attachment, bracing myself, and there it was. A legal form, cold and clinical. My name, Mara Shipman, printed in thin black letters, under the heading, Former Ward. No middle name, no birth date, just a space filler. Below that, in bold ink, was his signature. Firm, deliberate, untouched by regret. It was official. On paper, I didn't exist anymore. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. My reflection in the monitor was still. Too still. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen my own name and felt like it belonged to someone else. I was legally erased, I murmured, the words like static. Like love could be signed away. The screen blurred, and I forced myself to blink. I stood, needing air. The apartment felt too tight, like the walls were inching closer, whispering things I'd already spent decades trying not to hear. I sat at the kitchen table, lit only by the dull glow of the oven clock. My hands reached for the shoebox on the top shelf of the closet, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside, tucked between old school photos and a dried corsage from prom, was a white envelope. It was slightly crumpled, with a red stamp across the front. Refused, return to sender. Back in 2012, I had written a letter. I was 21, finishing community college, finally daring to ask the questions that had haunted me for most of my life. I hadn't asked for money or forgiveness. I wrote, I'm not asking for anything. I just want to know if you remember me. I mailed it to his office. It came back 2 weeks later, still sealed. I never opened it. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted to believe that not reading it kept some hope alive. That maybe, just maybe, he never received it. That it got lost, or the secretary tossed it, or the mailman made a mistake. But now I knew better. I put the envelope back into the box and closed the lid gently. Back at my computer, I started searching legal definitions, words like emancipation, relieved obligation, voluntary surrender. One after another, they all pointed to the same thing. My father had done more than walk away. He'd documented it. He had chosen to make it law. No birthdays, no visits, no responsibility. Just a neat little declaration that I no longer existed. Not in his family, not in his life. I deleted his number from my phone again, even though I knew it by heart. That little act used to feel symbolic. Now it just felt procedural. A few hours later, I stepped outside. The sun was beginning to lower behind the clouds over Point Defiance Park, casting long shadows across the walking trail. The wind bit through my coat, but I needed it. Needed something to cut through the dull throb building behind my eyes. I watched a family nearby toss bread to ducks. A father leaned down to help his daughter aim. I didn't look away this time. If I was erased on paper, I whispered to the wind, then maybe it's time I rewrite myself onto it. Tomorrow, I was going to the courthouse. If I was in the will, they'd have to say my name, out loud. I stepped into the courthouse lobby with my name echoing in my mind. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, mixing with the soft hum of the central heating. The walls were beige, the kind of beige that made time feel slower. I approached the window labeled Estate Division and tapped gently on the counter. The clerk behind the glass didn't look up. Name? Mara Shipman, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Clicking keyboard keys. A pause. Executor of record is Vera Godfrey. You'll need to contact her directly or speak with the firm handling the estate. She slid a slip of paper under the glass, a phone number written in bold. My stomach turned. I nodded and walked out, the number clutched between two fingers like it might burn through skin. Vera. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in decades, and somehow it still managed to feel like a whisper meant to hurt. The number stayed on my kitchen counter all day. I didn't touch it. I made lunch. I folded laundry I didn't need folded. I stared at the wall, but the number was still there, daring me. And finally, after the sun dropped behind the trees, I gave in. The phone rang once, twice. A woman picked up. Hello? Her voice hadn't changed. Still smooth, controlled, like every syllable had gone through a filter. This is Vera Godfrey. I froze. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, like hearing a song you hated but still remembered all the words to. This is Mara, I said slowly. Mara Shipman. A pause. Then, yes. I figured you'd call. She didn't sound surprised, not angry, just annoyed. Like someone who was asked to clean up a mess she hadn't planned for. There's no need for confusion, she began. Robert didn't leave a will naming you. And truthfully, I don't believe it was ever his intent to involve you. This is about simplifying the estate. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, but not from sadness. It was rage. Not loud, not messy, just pure and centered, like standing on solid stone after swimming too long. You're legally entitled to consider waiving your claim, she added. I let the silence stretch between us. Then I asked, Are you really calling me to make me disappear? Again? Another pause. And then she said something that boiled my blood. I'm calling to resolve this civilly. She hung up. I stood in my dim kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, even though the line had gone dead. I didn't move. Not right away. Just stared at the wall, that same beige as the courthouse. Except now, I saw it for what it was. Intentional. A color chosen to keep people numb. I grabbed my coat and walked out. Ruston Way wasn't far. I needed to move, to breathe air that didn't smell like old memories. The wind along the water was sharp, but I welcomed it. I walked past joggers, couples, a man feeding stale bread to gulls. I walked until my legs ached, then sat on a bench and stared at the choppy surface of the Sound. She really believes I don't matter, I whispered to myself, that I won't fight. But she was wrong. I remembered something I read once, something about how the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And Vera? She had perfected that. Well, if she wanted me silent, I'd remind her what my voice sounded like. Back home, I sat at my desk, opened a blank email, typed slowly. Subject. Inheritance rights. I do not waive. No pleasantries, no confusion, just. I am asserting my full legal rights as a recognized biological descendant of Robert Godfrey. I do not waive my claim. Any communication intended to imply otherwise will be documented and submitted with my filing. Best, Mara Shipman. I clicked send. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a folder labeled Legal. Inside were copies of everything I'd gathered so far. Emails, screenshots, documents. I laid them out one by one like a poker hand. No bluff. Just facts. Let her think I'm a ghost. I'll haunt her with every line of the law she never thought I'd know. I pulled the deed records, and my name used to be on them. The woman at the Pierce County Records Office wore a red cardigan and a disinterested expression. She didn't ask why I needed property records tied to my father's estate. She just took my ID, typed a few things into the system, and printed out a slip of paper with a location code. Back wall, second shelf on the left. They're in hard copy. The room was cold. It smelled like dust and toner. I found the cabinet and flipped through the folders until I saw it. Shipman, Robert G. Shipman, Mara. At first, I just stared at it. The file was thin, no more than 6 pages stapled together. The first document was a title deed from 2001, showing a small lakefront property near Eatonville, land my grandfather once owned. And there it was, my name listed right below my father's, in plain black ink. A quiet part of me dared to feel something close to pride, a connection I didn't even know existed until now, but the next document wiped that away. An amendment from 2003. The language was precise, the formatting dry. Effective immediately, Mara Shipman is removed from designation as beneficiary. All rights shall consolidate under spousal estate protocols. My name wasn't just taken off, it was replaced. They didn't just give the land away, they rewrote it like I'd never existed. I whispered the words aloud, needing to hear them. They rewrote it like I never existed. I left the records office numb, file pressed against my chest like it might vanish if I let go. I didn't cry. Crying was something you did when you didn't expect it. But I had expected this. Back home, I sat on the floor beside the bookshelf, digging through a dusty box of papers my grandmother had mailed me years ago. Most of it was random, old report cards, a few birthday cards she'd written in beautiful cursive. Then, tucked between a manila folder and a Christmas card, I found it. A photocopy of a family trust agreement. A neon pink sticky note was stuck to the corner. "Keep this safe, it has your name." I unfolded the pages slowly. There it was. An agreement signed in 1998. My name listed again, this time as a direct heir to a portion of the trust from my grandfather's holdings. No conditions, no caveats. The trust should have protected me. Then I looked at the dates. The trust had been quietly nullified in 2003, before I turned 18. The legal maneuver was buried in an appendix. There was a version of my life where I was still part of it. Someone decided that version didn't deserve to happen, that someone was probably sitting in a home I would never be welcome in, enjoying the fruits of a legacy built by people who once called me family. I sat back and closed my eyes. Anger didn't burn hot anymore. It just settled into me like sediment. I was tired of being spoken about like a mistake, managed like a risk. So I stood up. I picked up the phone and dialed the estate's legal office. A receptionist picked up, chipper as ever. "I need a full list of all assets, holdings, and named beneficiaries of the Robert Godfrey estate," I said, calm but sharp. "I'm afraid that information can only be—" "You have 10 business days before I issue a subpoena. The court has already acknowledged standing. I will not ask again." She faltered. "Let me check with—" "I'll wait." I wasn't bluffing. I knew what I had. And this time, I wouldn't be pushed back into a corner. "They think I'm still the girl who waited for a birthday card," I murmured to myself once I hung up. "I'm not." Later that night, I sat at my laptop and opened a new message. To estategodfreyandmason.com. Subject: Objection to beneficiary alteration. Without consent attached were scanned copies of both the original deed and the 1998 trust. In the body of the email, I wrote, "I am formally objecting to any modifications made to my legal designation within the Godfrey family estate without notification or signed consent. The enclosed documents reflect my previous status, which was altered under questionable conditions prior to my legal adulthood. Further correspondence will be directed through my legal representative. Regards, Mara Shipman." I clicked send. Then I sat back, hands folded in my lap. "Your game started years ago. Mine starts now." They responded by pretending I never sent it. That was a mistake. 3 days later, I received a bland auto-reply from Vera's assistant. "At this time, you are not listed as an invitee to the private memorial of Robert Godfrey." No salutation, no explanation, just bureaucracy wrapped in digital frost. I checked the obituary link on the funeral home's site. His biography was sanitized, highlighting his achievements, his loving family, his impact on the community. The only names listed as survivors were Vera, Grayson, and Leora. Not me. That Saturday morning, I took the early bus to Bellevue. I stood across the street from the funeral home, dressed in a black coat and scarf, holding a cup of coffee I never sipped. Cars rolled in, sleek, expensive, the kind people valet. Men in tailored suits, women in somber dresses, everyone with practiced grief on their faces. A hired photographer moved among them like it was a wedding. From where I stood, I could see into the main lobby. Flowers everywhere. My father's face on a giant canvas, smiling like he never signed me away. Then Vera appeared, stepping out of a luxury SUV in heels too high for mourning. She greeted guests like a politician, patting hands, whispering into ears, and beside her, standing straight and poised, Grayson and Leora. I hadn't seen either of them in over a decade. Leora had my grandfather's chin. Grayson carried himself like someone who knew his place in the world was secured by someone else's name. The chapel doors opened. People filed in. I stayed behind, standing on the cold sidewalk, anonymous among strangers. Behind me, I heard a woman murmur to her friend, "I didn't know Robert only had one daughter." My jaw clenched. I didn't turn around. I just whispered to myself, he didn't. He had two, but one was disposable. That night, I walked into a church in Tacoma, not for him, but for me. It was a small vigil service, open to anyone grieving. Candles flickered on a simple altar, and soft music played in the background. During the prayer segment, a volunteer read from a list of the recently deceased. Robert Godfrey, survived by his loving wife Vera, and children Grayson and Leora. There it was. Again, edited out, erased from memory, and now from liturgy. I sat alone in the back pew, eyes fixed on the wax melting down the side of a nearby candle. My chest didn't ache. My hands didn't tremble. The pain had already moved deeper, past the body, into the bone. You know what it feels like to be edited out? It doesn't sting. It sears. I left before the closing hymn. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear every footstep echo behind you. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I just walked, because I didn't want to sit still long enough to come undone. They didn't just bury him. They buried me, too. But the difference? I was still standing. By the time I reached home, I already knew what I needed to do. I drafted a letter to the estate's legal team. To whom it may concern, please provide documentation for any funeral-related expenses drawn from the Robert Godfrey estate. As a verified legal stakeholder, I require confirmation of all authorized transactions made on behalf of the deceased. Sincerely, Mara Shipman. I signed it, scanned it, and sent it before the kettle even boiled. Then I did something I hadn't planned to. I opened my laptop and searched his name on social media. The funeral footage was already circulating, Vera's eulogy in particular. A video clip of her standing at the podium, voice controlled, posture graceful, as she called him a devoted father of two, who never wavered in his loyalty to family. Commenters praised her strength. Elegant and composed, one said. A woman of class, another wrote. I clicked Save Video. You used that podium to pretend I didn't exist, I whispered. I'll use your footage to prove I always have. But I didn't expect the next email to come from someone I hadn't seen in 20 years. Subject line, you might want to see this. The sender, Janice Latham. She'd once worked as my grandfather's paralegal. I remembered her vaguely. Sharp glasses, always clutching a clipboard, never wasting words. Her message was short. I came across something in the old archives. It concerns you. Would you meet me? We agreed to meet the next morning at a diner just off Pacific Avenue. It hadn't changed much. Same green vinyl booths, same smell of burnt toast and overused coffee pots. Janice was already seated when I arrived. a manila folder resting beside her like it carried weight. She didn't waste time. She pushed the folder toward me. This was slipped into a box labeled Scholarship Applications 2003, but it's not a scholarship document. I opened it slowly. The heading read, Voluntary Waiver of Parental Claims and Financial Interest. The signature line said, Mara Shipman, age 14. My breath caught. I remember this, I whispered. They told me it was part of a school funding form. Something to help with tuition. I signed it in a counselor's office. Janice nodded. It's been reformatted, legalized, reused. It's essentially a contract to relinquish your claim, disguised as an academic form. The paper trembled in my hand, but not from fear, from fury. That night, I took the document to a retired handwriting analyst Janice trusted. She worked out of a home office, walls lined with dusty books and framed certifications. She took one look at the signature and pulled out a magnifier. This isn't your stroke, she said gently. The loop formations are inconsistent. The pressure points don't match your known samples. I looked at her, my voice a whisper. So it's not mine? It's not yours, she confirmed. Someone traced your name, or attempted to mimic your writing. Sloppy, but legal enough if no one looks twice. I sat back. The air felt thick. Someone had signed me away before I was old enough to understand what I was losing. Someone forged a future that wasn't theirs to write. Back home, I spread every document I had across the kitchen table. The trust agreement from my grandmother, the original deed, the will fragments. Now, this forged waiver. Piece by piece, the pattern sharpened. I called my cousin Emma, a junior attorney working probate cases out of Seattle. She'd always been blunt, but loyal. She met me later that night and flipped through everything in quiet concentration. When she finally looked up, her voice was flat. You're not just in the will. You're the will they tried to rewrite. I looked at her. Then let's write it back. We got to work. Emma helped me draft a complaint, attaching every document, indexing each page with footnotes. We added the forensics report, the handwriting samples, timestamps from the files. The case wasn't clean. It was messy, emotional, but it was real. And then, at 11:47 p.m., just as I was reviewing the final draft for submission, a new email came in. From legalgodfreyfamilytrust.com, subject, Immediate Notice of Action. If you pursue legal proceedings, we will counter with a full lawsuit for defamation, obstruction of estate distribution, and emotional distress. All media or public disclosure of internal estate documents will be pursued in court. I didn't flinch. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, lips parting into a half smile. Funny how quick they found my name now. That's when the letter from the past arrived, in a manila envelope with no return address. It was sitting in my mailbox when I came back from the grocery store, wedged between a credit card promo and a takeout menu. The envelope was thick, aged at the edges, folded neatly, but handled enough to be familiar. No name, no postage, just my apartment number scribbled in black ink. Inside, a single-page letter typed on yellowing paper and a photocopy of what looked like a legal document. The letter read, "He meant for you to have this." I couldn't stay silent. No signature, no explanation. Just the date, 3 days after the funeral. The will was old but intact, signed and notarized. And there it was. My name, clear, legible. Half the estate allocated to me. My hands trembled. My throat tightened in a way I hadn't felt since I stood outside his funeral, invisible in plain sight. But this document didn't erase me. It remembered me. The next morning, I took the envelope to the Legal Archive Center downtown, a squat building buried behind City Hall. Inside, it smelled like old paper and cleaning fluid. The receptionist barely looked up as I explained what I needed. A clerk in a tweed vest brought me to the back. I gave him my name. When I said Shipman, his eyes lifted. "You're Harold Shipman's granddaughter?" "Yes." He disappeared for a moment, then returned with a worn brown box. "Your grandfather was a detail man. he said, setting it down gently. Made me promise to keep a backup version of the will, just in case. I opened the file. My hands were steady now. There it was again. My name. This time in ink, not pixels. Signed by Robert Godfrey, dated just months before he died. Notarized, witnessed, 50%. Half. Exactly what someone had spent the last 2 decades trying to keep from me. I closed the folder and looked at the clerk. Would you be willing to speak to that in court? He hesitated, then nodded once. I'd kept quiet long enough. Later that day, I walked into the estate office with the original will and a copy of the notarization. Their receptionist's face fell the second she saw me. She didn't need to ask why I was there. I was taken into a glass-walled conference room where 2 of Vera's lawyers sat. They didn't shake my hand, just motioned toward the seat across the table. I'm here to submit evidence for probate reconsideration, I said. This document was signed by Robert Godfrey after the alleged waiver was created. It supersedes any prior agreements. One of them glanced at the paperwork and immediately bristled. This document was never disclosed in discovery. Its chain of custody is questionable. I leaned forward. It's notarized, witnessed, stamped, and it's real. They whispered to each other for a few seconds. Even if admissible, one said, its intent could be debated. I smiled, cold, not smug. This isn't a favor, it's a correction. That night, back at home, I scanned the will again, saving it under 5 different file names. Just before closing the document, I noticed something odd. An extra line near the bottom. In the event of any dispute, consult Mr. Royce. I froze. Calder Royce. The elderly clerk who'd helped me that morning hadn't just been a record keeper. He was the one my grandfather had trusted to hold the truth until someone came looking. They buried the will, I murmured, but not the man who remembered it. I picked up the phone and dialed the archive center again. The line rang 5 times before the voicemail picked up. Mr. Royce, I said. This is Mara Shipman. I found the will. I need you to testify. I hesitated before ending the call. If you kept your promise to him, I'll keep mine to myself. Calder Royce didn't call back. He showed up at my door. It was early, just after sunrise. I hadn't even made coffee yet. I opened the door to find him standing there with a leather binder clutched tight in both hands. His coat looked like it had been worn through at the elbows, and the breath that escaped his lips fogged in the cold. You weren't supposed to be left out, he said. He didn't wait for me to invite him in. He stepped past the threshold like a man on a mission, settled into my dining chair, and placed the binder on the table like it was a sacred text. I promised your grandfather I'd hold on to this in case it ever came to this. Inside were pages that confirmed everything I'd uncovered, and more. Copies of the original will, the notarized trust agreements, and a sealed envelope marked with my initials in a handwriting I hadn't seen since I was 7. But it wasn't just what he brought. It was who else he remembered. There's more, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. This came to me 6 months ago. Odessa sent it before she passed. My heart skipped. Odessa was the housekeeper. No, more than that. She'd been the only adult in that house who ever called me sweetheart, like she meant it. He handed me the folded letter. Odessa's handwriting was messy, slanted, but unmistakable. Vera screamed that day, she'd written. Said you were not his responsibility anymore. She made him throw away the photo of you 2 by the dock. I fished it out of the trash and kept it. Half of it was torn, but I never forgot the look on his face before she made him burn the rest. I reread that paragraph over and over, my hands growing cold despite the heater buzzing behind me. So much effort went into pretending I didn't exist. Calder sipped water, his hands trembling slightly. She told Robert if he didn't remove you, she'd leave. He was weak, Mara. But he didn't forget you. That's why this, he pointed to the will, was signed in secret. I nodded slowly. Will you testify to that? He didn't even blink. That's why I'm here. That same afternoon, I reached out to Brenda Vicks, my old caseworker. I wasn't sure she'd remember me, but her voice cracked when I said my name. "I always wondered what happened to you," she said. "It didn't feel right back then. The papers moved too fast. There were holes in everything." We met for coffee the next morning. She brought a manila folder of her own. Typed notes. A dated timeline. A witness statement. "I couldn't stop it then," she said, tears gathering behind her glasses. "But I can back you now." "People don't forget when they were told to look away," I said, folding the documents and sliding them into my bag. Back home, I cleared the kitchen table. Emma, my cousin, and my attorney laid everything out in neat rows. The notarized will, Calder's testimony, Brenda's declaration, Odessa's letter, the forensic analysis of the forged waiver. "This isn't a dispute," she said, tapping the top sheet. "This is a cover-up." I looked at her, then down at the folder of documents. "They wanted quiet," I said, my voice steady. "What they'll get is a courtroom." We submitted the filing that night. 3 days later, I opened my mailbox and pulled out a thick envelope stamped with a seal I hadn't seen since jury duty. Superior Court of King County, in the matter of the estate of Robert Godfrey. I stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and sat down at the kitchen table. The weight of it in my hands was heavy, but not crushing. Not anymore. I ran my fingers over the seal, then smiled, just barely. Now it's their turn to answer. The courtroom wasn't what I expected, but I came prepared. The walls weren't nearly as grand as they seemed in movies. It was sterile. Beige chairs, dull carpet, the distant sound of shuffling papers and shoes against tile. But it didn't matter. Because I wasn't there to be impressed. I was there to be heard. I arrived early, Emma walking beside me, calm and focused as ever. She carried the file box like a quiet threat. I held my own folder close, not for show, but because it was finally mine. My evidence, my name, my proof. Vera was already seated when we walked in. Designer suit, stone-faced. Her attorney leaned in and whispered something, but she never looked our way. The judge entered, and the room settled. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. During the early proceedings, it was all protocol. File numbers, timelines, family trust language, the language of distance. But when it was my turn, I stood and walked to the front with the letter from 2008 in my hands, a scholarship denial. On paper, a simple thing, but to me, it was a wall. "This is a rejection letter from the Northwest Academic Foundation," I told the court. I had earned the grades, the recommendations, but the final requirement was a parental signature, proof of financial hardship, legal verification of support or lack thereof. I paused, letting the room quiet around me. He refused to sign, refused to acknowledge I existed. He didn't just walk away, he stood in the way. The judge nodded once. Emma followed with a presentation of the trust documents, the forged waiver, and the forensic handwriting analysis. Then, I stepped forward again. "There's one more thing," I said. I pulled a small flash drive from my coat pocket and handed it to the clerk. "It's a video," I said. "Recorded 6 months before his death. Found in a lockbox passed down through my grandfather's legal archive." The judge decided to review it in chambers. We waited in silence. When she returned 20 minutes later, something had shifted. Her tone lost the bureaucratic lilt. She looked at Vera longer than she looked at me. Then she addressed the room. "For the record, the video submitted confirms the deceased, Robert Godfrey, intended to include Mara Shipman in his final will, and expressed regret over actions taken to obscure her involvement." Vera's face didn't change, but her lawyer leaned in, panic blooming behind his glasses. Emma whispered, "That's the turning point." Later, outside the courtroom, Calder gave a short, steady statement. "I kept this for decades," he told the press, "for this moment." I didn't speak to reporters. I didn't need to. As I stood on the courthouse steps, watching Vera's entourage scramble to a waiting car, I didn't feel victorious. Not in the way I imagined. There was no fist in the air, no tears. Winning doesn't always feel like justice. Sometimes it just feels necessary. Back inside, we were told the official ruling would be delivered next session. As I gathered my things, someone approached me from the gallery. An older man in a gray coat. He handed me a small envelope. "He wasn't the only one who left something for you," he said, then walked away before I could ask his name. I stared at the envelope in my hand. Handwritten. My name on the front. No return address. I didn't open it. Not yet. But I felt something shift. The story wasn't done. Inside the envelope was a photograph, and a name I hadn't spoken in 15 years. The photo was familiar. I'd seen it online days after the funeral. Vera's carefully curated post. A wide shot of the Godfrey family lined up in front of the chapel. But this version was different. It wasn't a copy of that photo. It was the original. I sat at my kitchen table, light pouring through the blinds, the smell of reheated coffee stale in the air. I held the photo at arm's length, studying every corner. Grayson on the left, Vera at the center, Leora on the right, and then, on the far edge, just barely visible, the curve of a shoulder. The outline of a black sleeve. Me. I flipped the photo over. In faded ink, someone had written, "Before the crop." They didn't just pretend I wasn't there. They made sure no one could prove I ever was. That evening, I stopped by a local print shop. I had them print 2 copies, the cropped version everyone had seen, and the full one, the truth. I left both taped side by side on the community board of the cafe across the street, with a small note in between, handwritten on lined paper. Not everything invisible was missing. Not everyone missing was forgotten. No name, no explanation, just a truth left in the open air. I didn't feel vindicated walking away, but I did feel lighter. The next day, I boxed everything up, the court documents, the USB, the forensic reports, even the letter from Odessa. I labeled the box Archive Personal and slid it onto the highest shelf of the closet, beside winter coats I barely wore. I didn't do it to forget. I did it to move forward. I paused a moment, hand still on the box. There was something almost sacred about letting things rest where they couldn't hurt you anymore. Back at the kitchen table, I opened a blank page in my journal and wrote, "Sometimes closure isn't something you receive, it's something you create." I didn't need anyone to say my name anymore. I'd already spoken it enough. That evening, as I was rinsing my coffee mug, the phone rang. The number was blocked. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, before finally answering. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard since that cold day on the sidewalk outside the funeral home. "Mara, I didn't know who else to call. They've frozen my accounts." Vera. I didn't speak. Not out of anger, but because I had nothing left to give her. The phone had already gone quiet by the time I lowered it from my ear. I stood there for a second, blinking into the early light spilling through the window. Then I set the receiver down and walked away. Let her sit in that silence. Let her know what it feels like when no one rushes to fix the mess she made. That afternoon, I submitted the last motion, a formal request for a financial audit of the Godfrey estate, citing evidence of concealed accounts. It was clean, direct, and final. It didn't come with an apology or a warning, just facts and signatures. 2 days later, a video surfaced on a community blog. Security footage from a bank in Bellevue, Vera at the counter. She was mid-argument, her voice sharp and unhinged, gesturing wildly. The teller behind the glass looked scared. The caption read, "Local socialite denied access to late husband's estate." In the video, Vera shouted, "You don't know who I am!" But they did. And that was the problem. The court had placed a freeze on the account. Everything was locked, pending judgment. I didn't repost the clip, didn't comment. I just watched it in silence from my kitchen table, arms folded, tea going cold in front of me. It wasn't my voice they heard that day, but it was my power they felt. The ruling arrived in a thick envelope with the county seal. Mara Shipman is awarded full legal recognition as a beneficiary per the original will, it read. 50% of the estate. Additional damages for obstruction. Mandate of public correction to the family record. No headline, no spotlight. Just black ink on white paper. I lit a candle. Not in celebration, in finality. Sometimes justice isn't applause. It's the silence that follows a door finally shutting. A week later, I drove out to the cabin. My grandmother's old place sat by the lake, quiet and unchanged. The trees whispered above me as I stepped inside, dust and sunlight pooling on the hardwood floor. I didn't bring much, just an overnight bag and a photograph. I placed the photo on the mantel, uncropped. Me and my father standing by the dock, years before Vera, before courtrooms, before silence became my native language. He didn't get to tell the last story. I did. That night, I sat at the small desk in the cabin's back room and opened a blank page. I didn't write to him. I wrote to myself. Dear me, you didn't disappear. You survived erasure, and you rewrote the ending. I sealed the letter and slipped it into the drawer beside the bed. Sometimes the last word isn't loud. It's simply yours. When I look back, it's not the legal documents or courtroom wins that stay with me. It's the silence. The silence I endured and the silence I broke. Sometimes the loudest things we'll ever say are the ones we say with action, with truth, with resilience. I've learned that being erased doesn't mean you cease to exist. And just because someone doesn't claim you, doesn't mean you're unworthy of being claimed. Family can wound deeply, but it's what we do with that wound that defines our strength. You don't have to scream to be powerful. Sometimes simply refusing to disappear is enough. To anyone watching this who's ever been pushed aside, rewritten, or told they don't belong, know this. You are allowed to stand back up. You are allowed to reclaim your space. You are not just what they said you were. You are who you decide to be. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where your existence, your truth, or your place in a family or workplace was denied? How did you respond, or how would you respond if it happened today? If this story touched your heart, type 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if you disagreed or felt something else, tell me why. Let's talk about it. And if you want more real stories about strength, family, and finding your voice, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got so much more to share. Until next time, keep showing up even if someone once told you not to.